It's Ben Sliney's first day as National Operations Manager at the Federal Aviation Administration.
I can recall the morning of 9/11 quite clearly. It was forecast to be an absolutely brilliant day on the East Coast, which is crucial to air traffic control and the running of aircraft without delay.
The perfect weather means American Airlines Flight 11 departs Boston on time. But 25 minutes after takeoff, air traffic control is alarmed to hear foreign voices in the cockpit.
The supervisor told me there was a potential hijacking in effect.
It soon becomes clear this is no ordinary hijack when news bulletins report the North Tower of the World Trade Center has been hit by a plane.
I did not know it was American 11 at that juncture, but I feared for the worst.
Next, Sliney witnesses the second tower being hit live on TV.
There was a collective gasp in that room that I can still hear in my ear today. And then that was followed by an incredible silence. To see an aircraft that you know is loaded with passengers and crew crash violently and suddenly like that, it's the most stunning sight I've ever seen in my entire career in aviation. I could not get my head around the notion that the hijackers could force a pilot to fly the plane into the building.
What Sliney doesn't know is the planes are not being flown by pilots, but by terrorists. And there are two more on their way to hit targets with potentially even greater consequences. The third hijacked plane, American Airlines Flight 77, took off from Washington Dulles Airport and will later impact the Pentagon. The fourth hijacked plane is also on a deadly course for Washington, D.C., with jihadist Ziad Jarrah at the controls. But the passengers and crew of United 93 are not letting the plane go down without a fight.
They were not going to be stopped. They were trying to get that airplane back in control and kill those or subdue those that had taken the aircraft over.
But the passengers would never have made it into the cockpit had the terrorists not delayed their mission. This is what the movie doesn't explore. What follows is the real story of Ziad Jarrah. The tale begins in Beirut, Lebanon, with an ordinary young man. Ziad Jarrah grew up in an affluent family of secular Muslims and doesn't go to mosque.
He was a party boy, he had a good time. He didn't live a strict religious life.
At 20 years old, he's celebrating his acceptance into a junior college in Germany. But college life in the German city of Greifswald is not as exciting as Jarrah imagined.
I don't know what he expected to find at Greifswald, but what was there wasn't it. And the town is dreary and it's not hip in any way. It's cold, it's dark, and for a guy from the shores of the Mediterranean, it had to be a shock physically.
Jarrah initially struggles to make friends. And it's at this point that two new influences enter his life that will tear him in opposite directions. The first is a radical Muslim student from Yemen who is vocal about his contempt for Western life.
The pseudo-preacher, Abdul Rahman, I think he came to Germany and was appalled by what he found. And then he sees these young Muslim men. He felt it was his responsibility to keep them on a truer path and to not become westernized, not become corrupt like the West, not to fall away from Islam.
Abdul Rahman calls Jarrah a weak Muslim who doesn't know how to say his prayers.
So now here's somebody in his face about not being devout enough, not being pious.
Abdul Rahman invites Jarrah to attend his student prayer group.
I hope we will see you there.
The second big influence he meets is dentistry student Aysel Senguen.
Aysel is quite pretty, very gregarious, very outgoing, and very popular.
Aysel makes fun of Abdul Rahman's reputation as a self-appointed enforcer of Muslim doctrine. When Jara starts dating Aysel, his life in Germany seems to get better, and he makes plans to study dentistry.
They made a striking couple. Ziad was a handsome young man, and they were the center of attention at parties.
But there's an ongoing conflict, because Jara is also being influenced by the Yemenis' extreme views of Islam. Against Aysel's wishes, Jara has been attending Abdul Rahman's prayer group.
She objected to his association with Abdul Rahman, and they fought about that. They broke up, they got back together. It was a fraught relationship.
Despite Aysel's best efforts, she's losing the man she loves to extremism.
He wasn't the happy-go-lucky guy they had all known. He had a demeanor. He wanted her to wear a veil, he wanted to wear different clothes, he wanted to choose her friends.
She objected to the new belief system that he was beginning to espouse. She thought it was a dangerous way to go, and it made no sense in the modern world.
Aysel's fears are confirmed when Jara follows Abdul Rahman and his radical friends and moves to Hamburg. Jara abruptly quits his plan to study dentistry and switches to aircraft engineering. And Abdul Rahman introduces Jara to Al-Quds, a mosque in the city's red light district. The depravity of the area offends the devout Muslims.
When you walk down Steindam, you experience the worst of the West. If you needed evidence, you didn't have to go very far. It's not theoretical. There's an Albanian hooker shooting up on the corner. And so when you walk into the mosque, it's an escape from the horror of the West. And that horror reinforces everything you're being told about it being the wrong path.
Jara has entered the most radical mosque in Europe. He's welcomed as a brother and offered solace.
The clubhouse. It was a place where young men, mainly, gathered, and it was a real companionable aspect to it. It was a place for people who were away from home, where they could have some part of home, or some community of their own.
But appearances are deceptive. The men here practice a version of Sunni Islam that is particularly harsh, fundamentalist, and militant.
The rhetoric would peel the paint off the walls. I mean, it's just horrifying. The preachers would tell these young guys that their duty was to go and be a soldier of Islam, to be a soldier of Allah, and to be vicious about it. The preacher says, it's too bad that we have to kill the young children, but we have to. It's our duty. And the West made us do this.
The young men soak up the extreme rhetoric.
If you're 19 or 20 years old, you're looking for something to believe in, you get this. It can be pretty powerful.
Jara's new friends from the mosque invite him to the House of the Followers, an apartment on Marienstrasse. They may seem like any group of young outsiders, but these men will one day be known to US intelligence as the Hamburg Terror Cell.
It became sort of the second clubhouse, and they hosted large numbers of their other friends from the mosque there. They would recruit other people to come and learn Islam.
They would pray, and they would watch videos, and they would chant, and they would talk about devoting their lives to jihad.
The young men discuss a way to express their devotion to Islam.
They talked endlessly about this, and they would argue about it. We should just go have families. We should raise our children the right way. They thought they were pious men. They found a path that they thought was righteous. They're trying to find a way to act in a world they saw gone wrong.
They turn their focus to the unrest in the Middle East.
They were watching videos from battlefields of Islamic radicals, reading about Osama bin Laden. Everything was coalescing right there. Their anger, their fury was building up toward the West, toward the United States.
Eventually, they decided that what they were called upon to do as devout young men was to go fight on behalf of their beliefs. To say that they were wrong is to say the obvious.
These guys wanted to do more than just sit around in an apartment in Hamburg and spew Islamic chants. They wanted to put their plans into action, and they thought going to Afghanistan would do that.
Marwan al-Sheri, Ziad Jarrah, Ramzi bin Aziz al-Sheikh, and Mohammed Atta volunteer to train with al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. It's the first step on an evil journey that will change the world forever. By December 1999, the Hamburg cell has arrived at an al-Qaeda training camp near Kandahar in Afghanistan. With their fluency in English and familiarity with life in the West, the Hamburg cell stands out as a valuable asset to al-Qaeda.
Fairly early on, the leadership saw that these guys were to be used for a different reason. Very quickly, they were elevated to a different class.
The four are selected to meet the leader, a man who will one day be the most wanted terrorist in the world, Osama bin Laden.
Bin Laden assessed them very quickly and saw that they were people who could live in the Western society.
Bin Laden reveals a chilling plot to bring the world's greatest superpower to its knees.
They're asked if they will accept this mission for what bin Laden called the planes operation. You're going to learn to fly airplanes into buildings and kill thousands of people. And they said yes immediately. I don't understand that. Would you not pause? None of these guys are recruited. They're volunteers, offering themselves at just the time that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and bin Laden were looking for pilots. They just happened to walk in the door. It must have seemed like a gift from Allah, you know? I mean, it's just an astonishing thing. Obviously, these guys were prepared. They had already gone over to the other side.
The men are instructed to return to Germany and apply for flight school. To seal their pact, Jarrah films a martyrdom tape with Mohammed Atta.
You can see what belief wrongly wielded can do. Boy, you got to be careful. You have to be careful with what your belief system instructs you to do. When it starts telling you how to behave, it can be a force for enormous good in the world, and right now it's also a source for enormous bad.
When he arrives back in Germany, Jarrah reports his passport lost and claims a new one.
It's an old al-Qaeda trip to expunge any record of travel to Afghanistan.
Jarrah quits the mosque, dresses in Western clothing, and shaves off his beard.
They were instructed from that point on, in Germany or in the United States, they weren't to look the part. They were to look as westernized as they could.
But there's one major thing that sets Jarrah apart from the rest of the Hamburg cell.
Even as he became more radicalized, he couldn't let ISIL go. He was the only one that maintained that kind of relationship. There was something about him that kept one step outside that circle, which makes him very unique.
When Jarrah disappeared, ISIL feared the worst.
He left without telling her where he was going. She thought he was going home. She was frantic when she couldn't find him, when she didn't hear from him. 5 weeks later, He walks into the apartment. He's shaving his beard. He looks like the Ziad she knew in Greifswald.
Jara apologizes for his absence and begs her forgiveness.
He brought gifts. He promised he had changed. She asked where you've been. He said, it's better that you don't know where I was. So she probably had some suspicion. But again, if she wanted the relationship to go on, here he was. It appeared that he had turned the corner.
He says, everything's fine. I've found myself. I know what I want to do now. I want us to be together forever. So she was thrilled. She thought, great, this would be wonderful. Get him away from all of this crap, you know, from these people, from these men. Start anew, have a family. She persuaded herself because she wanted to, especially in relationships. We persuade ourselves that you love or are loved. You want that to be the case. And she desperately wanted that to be the case. She loved him. And she never forgot the Ziad she fell in love with. She wanted that guy back.
Jara tells Eisel he wants to move to the US and train to become an airline pilot. The first step in this evil mission is learning to fly. And during the summer of 2000, Jara enrolls at the Flight Training Center in Venice, Florida. While the other 9/11 jihadists go to flight schools in Venice in pairs, Jara deliberately chooses to go to a school on his own.
Atta wrote to at least 65 flight schools saying we want to become airline pilots. But Jara, again the independent, finds a school on his own. So throughout all this, he's always a little different than the others.
Jara excels in his flying lesson at Anna Kreuthoff's flight school.
My first impressions of Jara were good. He seemed like a very nice gentleman. Jara was soft-spoken, but clear. He spoke several languages, and he was funny. He was charming to the ladies. He was charming also. Seemed like a nice guy. So I think he played his role very well.
This was all part of the Al-Qaeda deception. It was right out of the Al-Qaeda manual. That's how you do it, how you blend in.
Once Jara obtains a single-engine private pilot's license, he starts to realize American life has a lot to offer.
I think Jara, with his time in Venice, was introduced to the American dream. It had to be of some interest to him. He was doing things that certainly weren't in the Al-Qaeda manual. He wasn't following all the rules.
He makes countless phone calls to his girlfriend and visits her in Germany.
He made 5 trips overseas for a total of 90 days when they were supposed to be training. It had to blur his focus.
Eisel also visits him in Florida, and Jara introduces her to his new friends.
Eisel was cute, or pretty. When she first saw me, she had a big smile on her face. He introduced her as his future wife. I told Jara, this is a good catch. I mean, this is a good woman. You chose well.
Jara's enthusiasm for the American way of life is apparent to his new friends.
He's on his own, with having beers, doing all the stuff that you would do as a young man in Florida. So these are happy days.
But Jara is not in the US for a good time. Mohammed Atta is training at another flight school nearby in Venice and keeps a close eye on Jara.
Atta was a unique figure. He was dour, resolute, determined, extremely religious, resistant to pleasure. He was totally focused on his task. Atta wanted 100% commitment, and Jara was just different than the others. There were signs every step of the way that he wasn't 100% committed to this at all times.
Eisel has bought Jara a one-way ticket back to Germany, and Al-Qaeda fears Jara is backing out. Atta reports back to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind behind the 9/11 plot.
KSM and Atta were really concerned that Jarrah wasn't going to come back. After all this time, he was going to drop out. He still got one foot in the other life.
Despite everything, Al-Qaeda will win.
He came close, and they were worried about him, but he never did. He decided to commit himself to the attack.
Eisel flies back to Germany, unaware she'll never see Jarrah alive again. On the eve of the mission, Jarrah writes a farewell letter to his girlfriend.
He tells her to be proud, to hold her head high, that he was doing exactly what he should be doing, that he was carrying out his life in the way that God wanted him to, and that they would be reunited in the afterlife.
Before boarding United Airlines Flight 93 with 3 other terrorists, Jarrah slips away to make a final phone call.
He's thinking about Eisel, even as he gets to the airport, saying, "I love you," leading her to believe that they were going to meet again in the relatively near future.
She thought up until the last day that he would be coming home.
Jarrah sounds normal and tells Eisel nothing about the plan to hijack 4 commercial planes, turn them into weapons of mass destruction, and fly them into iconic landmarks. It will be the deadliest attack on American soil in US history.
I love you.
United Flight 93 is scheduled to fly from Newark to San Francisco. Among the first passengers boarding are Louis Joey Naki II, a distribution manager who flies just once a year.
Unfortunately, I can count on my one hand how many times that he has flown for work. It wasn't that often.
A keen weightlifter with a big heart, he's always ready to help others out.
He'd give you the shirt off his back, the last dollar out of his pocket. But if you threatened him or someone he truly cared about, he had that ability to turn into another person. You know what I mean? And truly was never afraid of anyone or any man.
Up in first class is computer engineer and family man Edward Felt.
Ed was a thinker. He was a problem solver. He traveled the world solving issues that came up with software that his company had designed. He carried a notepad in his pocket. He'd be scribbling down thoughts that came to mind all the time. He was married, had 2 children, was a wonderful father, just a brilliant man.
Ed has no idea he sat across the aisle from Ziad Jarrah. And also up in first class are 3 more Al-Qaeda muscle hijackers.
There's supposed to be 1 pilot and 4 muscle hijackers. Jarrah's crew had 1 pilot and 3 muscle hijackers. So they had 1 fewer man. The pilot who was wavering the most had the smallest crew.
United 93 is scheduled to depart at 8 a.m. But at 8:01, it's only just been pushed back from the gate. Then, because of heavy airport congestion, it's delayed further. At 8:46 a.m., American Airlines Flight 11, piloted by Mohammed Atta, hits the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. Just 17 minutes later, Marwan al-Shehi flies United Flight 175 into the South Tower. 200 miles away at the FAA in Herndon, Virginia, National Operations Manager Ben Sliney fears the nation is under attack.
They called a national ground stop, which simply meant that no other aircraft could take off from any airport in the country and enter the airspace system.
But the order doesn't stop the deadly mission of the 3rd hijacked plane. And at 9:37 a.m., it hits the Pentagon.
And that was the point at which We knew that it could not have been the pilots flying the aircraft.
Realizing there could be more hijacked planes still in the sky, Sliney makes the biggest call of his life.
I ordered all aircraft in the system to land at the nearest airport. At that point, we had over 4,000 aircraft airborne.
Sliney's plan will identify any terrorists left in the sky.
I thought if everybody landed, whoever else was in the sky, well, then the military could deal with that.
But the orders come in too late for United 93. It's already taken off with 4 jihadists on board. 15 minutes into the flight, the jihadists are meant to start the hijack and divert the plane to Washington, D.C. But the flight carries on to San Francisco. By now, unknown to the passengers, 2 planes have hit the World Trade Center.
Hijack crews were supposed to hijack the planes within 15 minutes of takeoff.
But the hijackers remain in their seats. While we can never know for sure why this team of terrorists delayed, Tom McMillan believes Jarrah's inner conflict had something to do with it.
I will always believe, from looking at Jarrah and looking at the way he behaved from the time he was in Hamburg through September 11th, he was wavering till the very end, and then, as he always did, chose to be a committed jihadi.
It's another 20 minutes before the jihadists put their horrific plan into action. The delay will cost them their mission. At 9:28 a.m., the jihadists begin their attack.
These guys came in with their knives, their box cutters. It was very quick and very violent in the cockpit.
The horror that our loved ones saw, the violence in front of them, all around them, I can only imagine. It's haunting, terrifying.
Open now.
To try to put myself in their place on that day, I don't know if any of us can.
The cockpit voice recorder picks up the violence in the cabin.
We know that one of the flight attendants was pleading for her life. We believe that they used her and the threat of her life to break into the cockpit.
You could hear screams. It was not an easy recording to listen to.
The third muscle hijacker emerges to force the passengers to the back of the plane.
This was a tactic that they used on all 4 flights. They had watched hijackings, and they wanted to threaten and control the passengers with a bomb.
But in fact, the bomb is a fake.
It looked like they had a bomb.
And that's why these people are called terrorists. These are terrorizing events.
With the terrorists now in control of the plane, it's time for Jarrah to play his part. Because the passengers described seeing just 3 terrorists, it's thought Jarrah snuck into the cockpit after the pilots are killed. Jarrah switches off the autopilot and diverts the plane towards a target in Washington, D.C.
I really believe it was the Capitol. I have even heard that there was confusion among them if the Capitol was the White House. It certainly was a much larger and an easier target to go after. When you're up in the air and you try to look down as you're flying around Washington, the White House isn't an easy target to find. It's covered by trees, where clearly the Capitol dome is very, very easily spotted.
But because of the 2 delays, the plane is much farther from the Capitol than the terrorists planned.
They were almost to Cleveland and therefore have farther to go to hit their target. So the timing is absolutely crucial.
So far, the passengers have been compliant and stayed in their seats.
You got to remember, back in 2001, your plane get hijacked, they're going to tell you to sit idly by. You know what I mean? Oh, we're going to land somewhere, they're going to ransom us off. No one had ever heard of them using large jetliners as weapons.
But everything changes when the passengers discover they're part of a massive terrorist plot.
They would have thought they were the only hijacking. I try to imagine what would have gone through your head if you're hijacking, you hear 2 planes have hit the World Trade Center, and then the Pentagon. And I think that was the moment that galvanized them. That's when they absolutely knew for certain they weren't going back to the airport. This wasn't a normal hijacking. There wasn't going to be a hostage negotiation. They were going to hit a building, and they had to do something.
This was not going to turn out that it was going to land somewhere and they would be free. This was basically a death mission.
Just call me back then.
The passengers comfort each other and tell their loved ones on the ground what's going on.
That's how we know what we know of the Flight 93 story once it was hijacked.
My brother Ed made a phone call. Ed was trying to help the 911 operator understand where the plane was, where it was headed. Ed, in a selfless way, was really trying to problem solve, and that's what he did in his life, and he was trying to get that information out that could be used to help in some manner. I've only listened to it once. I don't know if I could listen to it again. Can you imagine listening to a brother or sister or a family member that knew they were going to die? Hearing the timbre of their voice, trying to understand what they were going through, it will haunt me for the rest of my life.
Realizing their fate will be the same unless they intervene, the passengers hatch a plan.
How they still synthesized all that and came together and pulled together their counterattack in the brief amount of time that they did. This is one of the great stories in American history. I don't know how they did it, but the delay did give them that opportunity.
I can fly single engine. That's good.
Upon discovering one of them, Donald Green has a pilot's license. They vote to rush the hijackers.
You have people who don't know each other from all walks of life, planning to assault the terrorists that took over their plane, to prevent their plane from being used as a weapon. So they're giving their lives, facing that mortality before they execute that plan. The stress had to be unbelievable.
They voted, they prayed, and they chose not to allow these terrorists dictate the terms on how their lives were going to end.
There was a belief that they could overwhelm and take the aircraft back. That would have been the objective. I just can't believe anybody on that airplane had already given up and said, fine, we're going to fly it into the ground. No, I really believe the objective was to get hold of these people, overwhelm them, kill them if that was necessary, and then immediately get into control of the airplane and then attempt to land it.
At 9:57 a.m., the passengers' assault begins.
Their motivation was just to go home and have dinner with their wife and kids and their family. Once they decided to kick off their assault on the cockpit, that they were determined to win.
It's fake. Let's roll.
The voice recorder reveals the passengers' desperation to survive.
Just a little after 10 o'clock, there's an English-speaking voice that says, in the cockpit, If we don't, we'll die.
In the cockpit or we die!
If we don't, we'll die means to me they had an alternative to dying. I think they were trying to save the plane and get Donald Green into the cockpit and have him take a chance, long shot as it may have been, to land that plane.
Hearing the commotion in the cabin, Jara tells the other hijacker to block the door.
You actually hear them engage the terrorists outside the cockpit door. Trust me, they win that battle.
They were told, specifically by Mohammed Atta, that if they could not reach their targets, they were to crash the plane anyway.
At 10:02, Jara puts the plane into a nosedive. In Shanksville, Pennsylvania, the plane crashes into an empty field vertically at over 500 miles per hour. Everyone on board is killed instantly. Had the passengers not heroically tried to gain control of the plane, it would have likely destroyed its Washington target.
Would I have done what they did? Could I have done what they did? Just the sheer willpower of human nature that guides you just to get home to your family and not be a victim. It's phenomenal when you just think about it. It's amazing. There's no greater act in the world other than that, giving oneself for another. And that's what humanity's all about. Whether it's in America or anywhere in the world, humanity has to come first.
My brother, I think about every day, every hour. And I feel his loss deeply. Ed was a genius and also a very simple man. I think if he could be remembered as a good father and a good husband, he couldn't ask for anything more.
I miss my brother every day. I would trade anything in this world to get him back. But I also think that he might have been placed on that plane to make sure that that plane did not reach intended target.
United 93 was within 20 minutes flying time from Washington, D.C. Although President George W. Bush authorized a shoot-down around 10 a.m., the official commission investigating the attacks was unconvinced the military could have acted in time.
There was potential for a huge loss of life and certainly disruption of the government. There was a joint session of Congress that day, so it would have been very devastating if that plane had hit. It also would have been devastating to the American psyche. The Capitol is one of the symbols of our country. It would have been devastating emotionally in addition to physically, and potential decapitation of the government, which is what they were going for.
United 93 was the only plane that didn't reach its intended target. The delays to takeoff and to the hijack itself undoubtedly played a part in the passengers' revolt.
Those two delays are huge parts of the Flight 93 story. We'd be telling a completely different story today if it had taken off on time and they had hijacked the plane on time.
The official commission investigating the 9/11 attacks discovered Al-Qaeda was concerned that Jara might withdraw from the operation.
We do know that Jarrah was the least committed, that he wavered on numerous occasions, and he had the smallest crew. All of those things could have been factors as to why he waited that long.
The truth of what happened on United 93 died with the passengers and with the terrorists. But something caused the jihadists to delay the attack. 2 days after the events of 9/11, when ISIL had been unable to make contact with Jara. She phones the police to voice her concerns he may have been caught up in the attack.
ISIL had the only seat to watch this whole thing unfold. I mean, she saw it from the beginning to the end. That close, but she couldn't see on the other side of it. She couldn't see what was on the other side. But she saw him going down this path and tried mightily to stop it and thought at different times that she had.
Investigators conclude ISIL had absolutely nothing to do with the terrorist plot. And even though she was the love of his life, ISIL was powerless to prevent Jara's seduction to the evil powers of bin Laden.
These guys saw themselves as soldiers of God. When you wed political belief to religious belief, it's an overwhelmingly powerful force, and you will do whatever in its behalf. And they did.
But the terrorists' belief was a perversion of religion, as President George W. Bush was at pains to point out.
The face of terror is not the true faith of Islam. That's not what Islam is all about. Islam is peace. These terrorists don't represent peace. They represent evil and war.